All right, so now we're moving on to ritual, and we're actually going to have two slides for ritual because there's a couple of important practices and events to talk about for Islam. So we're going to begin our discussion of ritual by going over the five pillars. And this is something that many of you may have heard about before taking this class. A lot of people are familiar with the fact that Islam has what are called the five pillars, which are sort of the basics or the fundamentals of living a devout Muslim life. And the idea is that we'll talk about the idea after the Shahada of why it's called the five pillars. But the first of the five pillars is called the Shahada. And I do want you to learn the Arabic names for these because they're usually referred to as their Arabic names. So the Shahada in Islam is the confession of faith. And it's basically the sentence that we started this unit out with, which is that there is no God but God, and Muhammad is his messenger. That is really the basic statement of belief in Islam. Anyone who believes that that statement is true is a Muslim. So the confession of faith is something that you would say if you are, for example, going to convert to Islam. There's nothing like a baptism or other type of initiation rite or ceremony to become a Muslim. Really just requires speaking that sentence out loud and meaning it. Of course, saying it with sincerity and with belief, right? That there's no God but God, so there's only one God, and Muhammad is his messenger. So usually if someone is going to convert to the tradition, they would say that out loud in the presence of others. But as we'll see, that statement itself is woven through a lot of daily Muslim life. So it's a statement that isn't just said, every once in a while or just said upon conversion. It's said throughout the day, throughout the year, and it's really a fundamental part of living a Muslim life is speaking the Shahada, the confession of faith. And so the other four pillars, Prothero goes over this, are thought of as supporting the Shahada. So other than the Shahada, the other pillars are actions that you do. And remember, in Islam, belief and action are closely intertwined. So the other four pillars that we're going to go through next are seen as the base or the support system for the belief, right? You do these actions throughout your life in order to support your belief in that statement. So that's the five pillars, that's the first pillar, the Shahada. So that's the statement of Muslim theology, Muslim belief, that you have to believe in order to be a Muslim. The second pillar is Salat. It's sometimes spelled slightly differently, but Salat is prayer. And it doesn't refer to, Salat isn't like a personal prayer. It refers to the formal prayers that a Muslim performs every day. So we talked about this briefly before, but Muslims pray 5 times a day, every day. And these prayers, they are done at a set time. So it's not just like you can, at some point in your day, you do these 5 prayers. They happen throughout the day. And the earliest one starts before sunrise, and the last one occurs after sunset at night. And they're spread throughout the day, and they vary slightly each day. So it's not like every day the first morning prayer is at like 6 a.m. or something like that. They vary slightly every single day because it's based on the time of the sunrise and the sunset. And just like every day the sun rises, it's like could be like 6:37 one day and then 6:41 the next day. The timing of the prayers changes a little bit each day. So that means that you have to know when to pray because it's not at the same time each day. So that's where the tradition of the call to prayer comes from. So that people will know when it's time to pray, they'll hear the call to prayer. And if you look at the YouTube playlist, I have a call to prayer that you can listen to. In Arabic, it's called the Adhan. And this tradition started back in the time of the Prophet because somebody would get up in a high place and would yell out, that it's time to come to prayer. It's time to do your prayers. Today, the call to prayer has become sort of formalized in terms of the words that are said and the melody that's used, although it varies slightly depending on the country or the culture. And when you listen to it, you'll notice that it starts by saying Allah Akbar, which means God is greater or God is greatest. The idea of starting the call to prayer with that phrase is supposed to refer to the fact that whatever you're doing at that moment, right, whether you're sleeping, you're working, you're studying, doing whatever you're doing, that God is more important, God is greater than that activity. So you should stop doing that and come to pray. And then you'll also notice after that the Shahada is woven through the call to prayer. So the Shahada, the statement of the Shahada is in the call to prayer. So the prayers happen 5 times a day. The call to prayer is what sort of calls people to come and pray. Although today calls to prayer are still done because it's traditional, but many people set an alarm. You can have an app on your phone that will tell you when it's prayer time. But the call to prayer is still very much a part of Muslim culture, so it's still done at every mosque. Every mosque does the call to prayer 5 times a day. The prayers also, again, they're not informal, so it's not just like a personal conversation with God. There are prescribed words and prescribed actions, so it's a formal prayer. You have to memorize the words that you're supposed to say for that prayer, as well as the actions. And it varies slightly depending on which prayer it is. So there's, a certain words and actions for the first daily prayer, certain words and actions for the second daily prayer, but they're all very similar. It's just that they differ slightly. And another one of the videos that I have on that playlist will show you an example of a prayer, so you can see what one of the daily prayers looks and sounds like. It's usually the words come from the words of the Quran, so words from the Quran are spoken in the prayer. And the physical actions are kind of a cycling through of standing, kneeling, and then full prostration. So you actually get down on the floor and you touch your forehead to the ground, which is supposed to be a position of humility and submission to God. So I'm going to try to go over all the information for the prayers. 5 daily prayers, set words and actions. There's something else I was going to mention about it. All the daily prayers are done facing Mecca. So wherever you pray, wherever you are in the world, you have to know which way Mecca is so that you can position your body so that it's done facing Mecca. And all mosques are oriented towards Mecca, that their sanctuary space is pointing towards Mecca, which you can see in the picture behind me. This is a mosque service or a prayer service where there are many men gathered together to pray. Something else you'll notice about that picture, in a mosque, there are not like chairs or benches or pews as you might see in a church or a synagogue, and that's because of the actions of the prayers, right? That the sanctuary space is used for people to do their prayers throughout the day, throughout the week, and because it's standing, kneeling, and bowing down, as you can see the men are doing here, you need space to do that. So you can't have a bunch of chairs or benches in the prayer space because it's such a physically active prayer. You'll also notice that all of the men are right next to each other. There's no gaps or spaces in between them. That's very important in a mosque, that there's a particular seating arrangement. You're not allowed to just kind of spread out and have your own space when you do the prayers. Even if this mosque, was not full like it is in the picture, all the people who are there, who would be there, they would be right next to each other. So when you go into a mosque for a prayer, the first person comes in and they go very close to the front. Then the next person comes in and they are supposed to go right next to that individual so that they're almost touching shoulders. And then the first row fills up like that. And then someone can go into the next row and that row fills up like that. So you're not allowed to just kind of spread out and do your prayer in your own space. You're supposed to do it all together, right next to each other. And the idea is supposed to be that it creates a sense of brotherhood or sisterhood or equality, and that everybody's doing it together. So you notice there's no gaps or spaces in there. So those are the daily prayers. It's very important that Muslims do those 5 times a day at the prescribed prayer times. Then the third of the 5 pillars is zakat, and zakat is charity. So there is a requirement that once a year, every Muslim gives 2.5% of their assets to charity. So traditionally it's done on a yearly basis, but many Muslims choose to kind of divide this up throughout the year because that's easier financially than making kind of like a one lump payment once a year. But it does mean that you have to go through your finances and you have to calculate your assets. You have to calculate how much you're worth. You're only allowed to do it, you're only required to do it if you meet a minimum income. So those who are, struggling themselves and have, financial difficulties themselves are not required to give zakat. You have to kind of meet that threshold income before you're required to do it. But if you do meet that threshold, you have to, look at your finances, and there's lots of certain rules and regulations about, what exactly counts as an asset. Which possessions of yours do you have to count in that net worth? What is your worth? What is the sum total of your assets? So you have to do that, and then take 2.5% of that, and that's how much you have to give to charity. Which again, you could do once a year in a lump payment, or you could spread out throughout the year to make smaller payments. But that is required for Muslims to do at least once a year. The fourth pillar here is Ramadan, and again, this is something that many of you may have heard of before learning about Islam, if you didn't know that much about Islam before. Ramadan is a month-long period of time in Islam in which Muslims fast. So Ramadan, the word Ramadan here is the month-long event of fasting, and Sawm is the act of fasting. So during Ramadan, you perform Sawm. During this time, you perform your fasting. So what Ramadan is, it's a month out of the Muslim calendar. The Muslim calendar is a lunar calendar, so it's 30 days. It's always 30 days. And Muslims fast from sun up to sundown during that time. So every day, you cannot eat between sunrise and sunset, so the entire time that the sun is out. Muslims do this. It is a holy month because it's the month in which Muhammad began to receive the revelations. So that's why it's sort of marked as this holy or sacred month for Muslims. And so, as I said, what you do is you fast from sunrise to sunset. So it's a true fast. So Muslims are not allowed to eat any food. They're not allowed to drink any water or other liquids. You cannot smoke cigarettes. You cannot, do drugs, of course, and you cannot have sexual intercourse during that time. So it's a true fast during that time. And so usually Muslims they'll get up very early in the morning before the sun rises, and they'll have a very large breakfast to sort of, so that they have some food before the fast starts. That, of course, does not keep you full all day long. And then you fast until the sun sets. And then after the sun sets, you have another very large meal. But it's still, it's still a very long time to go without food. So you do feel that hunger. And the idea of doing this is twofold. The first reason is really kind of the same reason that there are practices of fasting in all religious traditions, which is the general idea that human beings have sort of a physical nature and a spiritual nature, or a body and a soul. So if we can learn to conquer our physical desires, to sort of sublimate our bodily or physical desires, then we can create the space for a spiritual encounter. We can focus more on the needs of the soul or the needs of the spirit, which is why people in many different traditions practice fasting. So that first reason is more sort of spiritual, to open yourself up to a spiritual experience, to focus on your spirituality. And the second reason is a little bit more practical, which is that it gives you an opportunity to feel what the hungry go through. If you have never felt hunger before, if you have never gone for a sustained period of time, feeling hunger and knowing how difficult and frustrating and painful that is, the idea is that you might not be as generous to the poor or to the hungry. But if every year you go through this process where you, for hours and hours every day, know what it's like to be really, really hungry, and to go through that pain and difficulty and frustration, then you are likely going to be more compassionate and more sympathetic to the poor, the needy, the hungry in your community, because you know what it feels like. You know how hard that is. So it's also supposed to create a more charitable mindset, because you are experiencing what the poor experience. So those are the two kind of reasons for practicing the fast for this time. And in general, because it's a holy and sacred time, Muslims are encouraged to focus more on their spirituality. So a very common practice is actually to read the entire Quran during Ramadan. So to divide the Quran up into 30 different sections, and then read the entirety of the Quran throughout that month. And also just in general to be the individual, to be the Muslim that you wish you were all the time, right? That we all sort of, wish that we were better people. We wish that we were more kind and more compassionate and followed our religious tradition more perfectly, but we just don't, because we're not perfect. But Ramadan is a time to really try to be that person, to try your best to be the person that you want to be. So it's a time to focus on spirituality as well as ethical behavior. So that's the fourth pillar, and that happens once a year as well. And then the very last pillar is Hajj. And Hajj is the pilgrimage to Mecca. So this is required that every Muslim do once in their lifetime. So they do it at least once, as long as they are financially and physically able. Going on Hajj, going to Mecca in Saudi Arabia, could be very costly depending on where you live in the world, right, to be able to travel to Mecca. And it's also quite physically demanding. The Hajj is several days long. There are lots of different activities that you have to do in and around Mecca. And it's very, very crowded. So it's very physically demanding. So you have to have, you have to have the physical ability and physical strength to be able to do it. So as long as you meet those requirements, then you are required as part of Islam to do it at least once in your life. And so there's also, I also posted a video on that YouTube playlist. It's actually from Vice News. That's a documentary of one of the correspondents' experiences going through Hajj. So you can kind of see what it's like, see how crowded it is, see what it looks like, and see his experience of going through the Hajj. But important to know a couple other things about the Hajj. It's not necessarily just, or not necessarily, it's not, going on Hajj doesn't just mean that you buy a ticket to Saudi Arabia, you go to Mecca, you go visit the sites, when you have a free week or something like that. Hajj only happens once a year, so you have to go during the Hajj season. So it's not like you can just go, anytime throughout the year when you have time. Everyone goes at the same time. So there's this period of time of several days that is the Hajj season, and that's when everyone goes. So you have to plan accordingly, and not everyone who wants to go can go. So Mecca is in the country of Saudi Arabia, so the Saudi Arabian government controls the Hajj. They manage the Hajj because they are the custodians of those holy sites. So if you want to go on Hajj, you actually have to apply to the Saudi Arabian government. You have to apply for a Hajj visa. So you have to, of course, be Muslim, and you have to write a narrative. You have to write a letter explaining why you want to go on Hajj this year. So, if you saved up for a long time to be able to do this, or you can do it this year, but then you're going to go back to school, or you're going to start a family, so this is really the time to do it. So you have to write a letter about why it's important for you to go this year. and then the Saudi Arabian government decides, who is going to get to go and who isn't. Many people go. The estimate is that at least recently, anywhere between 3 and 4 million people go on Hajj each year. So lots and lots of people make the Hajj every year. And so the idea of the application process is really just to make sure that those who have not had a chance to go yet get sort of first dibs on those Hajj visas, because there are a lot of people who have the financial means and love going on Hajj that apply every single year. So there are some people that go many times, but through the application process, the emphasis is on letting those people go who have never gone before, because everybody needs to go at least once in their life. So the Hajj, again, it lasts several days. There are certain activities and events that you have to complete in order to complete the Hajj. The most important of which is to go to the Kaaba. Right? Mecca is the holiest place in Islam because it's where the Kaaba is. It's also important that it's where Muhammad was born, it's where he died, but most importantly, it's where the Kaaba is. So one of the events that you do is you go to the Kaaba and you do circles around it, things like that. And there's a couple other events that you do as well over this several day period. So if you're interested, you can watch that video to see a little bit more of the experience of going on Hajj, of what this individual went through. And again, that's once in your lifetime if you're physically and financially able to do it. Okay, so those are all the 5 pillars, and next we're going to go over some of the holidays as well as life cycle rituals for Islam.